Good afternoon. My name is Dan Terrace. I'm director of the International Center for Ethics, Justice, and Public Life here at Brandeis University. The Richman Distinguished Fellowship in Public Life honors individuals active in public life whose contributions have had a significant impact on improving American society, strengthening democratic institutions, advancing social justice, or increasing opportunities for all citizens to realize and share in the benefits of the United States of America. I think it is obvious to everyone in this room that it is an honor for us to host as the second Richman Fellow, Mr. Julian Bond, a man who has made a significant impact in every one of those fellowship criteria. The fellowship has its origins in the vision of Brandeis alumna and trustee Dr. Carol Richman Savitz from the class of 1969, who created this award in 2014, along with her children, Michael Savitz, class of 1997, and Eliza Savitz-Glasser, class of 2001. The fellowship honors Carol's parents, Fred and Rita Richman, and we're very grateful to the whole family. The Richman Fellowship is also one of the great new traditions at Brandeis University, inaugurated under the leadership of President Fred Lawrence, who will formally recognize this year's fellow in a few minutes. With its emphasis on service to nation and social justice, the fellowship reflects and extends the deeply held values of the Brandeis University community. Last year's inaugural Richman Fellow, I'm sure many of you heard her, was Angela Glover Blackwell, the founding CEO of PolicyLink in Oakland, California. The 3 days that Ms. Glover Blackwell were here were transformative and exciting, and you can catch a glimpse of her talk and a video interview with her on the Richman Fellow website, which I bring to your attention both because that was a great year last year, but also because you'll be able to catch Mr. Bond, both the video of this lecture and a video interview on the site, because the Richman Fellowship involves 3 full days of conversation across this campus. So it's not just a matter of a lecture, but a chance for our community to really get to enjoy the benefits of conversation in a lot of different ways with the Richman Fellow. That process actually began this afternoon with a lunchtime conversation up at the Heller School, where Mr. Bond engaged with students from countries as diverse as Argentina, Colombia, Egypt, Mongolia, the United States, and other places, exchanging ideas about the ways in which nonviolent resistance has or has not had success in various parts of the world. It's an honor for my center, the International Center for Ethics, Justice, and Public Life, to host the Richman Fellow on behalf of the Office of the President. A special thanks goes to Ms. Marcy McPhee, the Associate Director of the Center, who's coordinated all of the many arrangements. And I'd also like to extend a special thank you to the members of the Richman Fellowship Committee, faculty and students, who put in many hours to assist with this selection process. And with that, it's my pleasure to turn the microphone over to a member of that selection committee, Professor Chad Williams, Chair of the African and African American Studies Department, who will introduce this year's Richman Fellow. Chad Williams.
Thank you, Dan. Good afternoon, everyone. So as far as life moments go, I can't imagine many be more meaningful than the opportunity I have today to introduce Mr. Julian Bond as recipient of the 2015 Richman Distinguished Fellowship. Very few individuals in the recent history of this country have, in the spirit of this award, worked towards improving American society, strengthening its democratic institutions, advancing social justice, and increasing opportunities for all citizens more than Mr. Julian Bond. Julian Bond was born in Nashville, Tennessee in 1940. The importance of education, social responsibility, and fighting for African American civil rights was instilled in Julian Bond at a young age. The home of Julia and Horace Mann Bond, both prominent educators, played frequent host to W.E.B. Du Bois, Paul Robeson, and other prominent Black activists and intellectuals. The Bond family moved north to Pennsylvania in 1945, when Horace Mann Bond became the first African American president of Lincoln University. After graduating high school, Julian Bond would return to the South to attend Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. On February the 1st, 1964, African-American students from North Carolina A&T State University integrated the lunch counter at the Woolworth store in downtown's Greensboro, North Carolina. Their act of bravery would ignite a sit-in movement that, like wildfire, spread throughout the entire South. Reading about events in Greensboro, Julian Bond did not wait for the sit-in movement to arrive in Atlanta. He made it happen. He recruited classmates, organized, and descended upon downtown Atlanta lunch counters, subjecting himself to arrest as well as abuse. The student sit-in movement would lead to the formation of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Julian Bond, at the ripe age of 20, attended the formative conference held at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina, heeding the words of the indomitable Ella Baker that the movement had to be about more than a hamburger. Committed to the fundamental structural transformation of American society, SNCC and its cadre of student activists worked to build a bottom-up movement and empower African Americans at the grassroots level to take control of their lives. SNCC members were the shock troops of the movement, placing themselves on the front lines in battles against white supremacist terror, and at the same time, organizing rural Southern African Americans to stake claim to their citizenship through the ballot and the electoral process. Julian Bond served as SNCC's National Communications Director, a position he held until 1965. During this time, he lived the Civil Rights Movement, the Freedom Rides, the March on Washington, Freedom Vote, and Freedom Summer in Mississippi, Selma. But he also helped to articulate its message to the South, to the nation, and indeed to the entire world. Julian Bond's political career is a testament to the truly revolutionary nature of SNCC and his commitment to transforming America's democratic institutions so that they are accountable to the needs of historically marginalized peoples. Backed by SNCC and the votes of African Americans in Georgia's 136th House District, Bond won election to the Georgia House of Representatives in 1965. White members of the House initially refused to seat Bond because of his opposition to the war in Vietnam. In 1966, the United States Supreme Court ruled in a landmark case that the House had denied Bond his freedom of speech and indeed had to seat him. He served in the Georgia House until 1965 and followed this with 6 terms in the Georgia Senate from 1975 to 1986. During this time, he also helped to found the Southern Poverty Law Center and served as its president from 1971 to 1979. Following his time in elective office, Mr. Bond, perhaps following in the footsteps of his parents, began a career in education. He has taught at several of the nation's most prestigious colleges, among them Drexel University, Harvard University, and most notably, the University of Virginia, where for 20 years he taught in the history department, offering courses on the history of the civil rights movement and Southern black politics. He is currently teaching at American University in Washington, D.C. Never straying far from his activist roots and commitment to fighting for civil rights, in 1998, Bond was selected as chairman of the NAACP, a position he held for 10 years. In 2009, at the conclusion of his service, Bond was honored with the Spinger Medal, the highest honor given by the NAACP, whose previous recipients have included James Weldon Johnson, Mary McLeod Bethune, Martin Luther King Jr., Maya Angelou, and many other prominent men and women of the Black freedom struggle. After such a long career in the work of social justice, from the trenches of the South to the halls of academia and nearly every imaginable place in between, one might think that Mr. Bond has earned a well-deserved rest. And indeed, he has. But just as Sweet Honey in the Rock, in their moving tribute to Ella Baker, sang, "We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes." Mr. Bond remains tireless in his commitment to public service and the cause of freedom. The fight to affirm that Black Lives Matter continues in 2015, and he remains on the front lines. He has also given his time, wisdom, and spirit to other battles, such as those for LGBT equality and climate change. As students, as educators, as committed citizens, we should all draw inspiration from Julian Bond's journey and the path he has blazed for us. It is our great privilege to have him with us this afternoon and to welcome him as part of the Brandeis University community over the next 2 days. Mr. Bond's talk today is titled How I Got in the Movement. A civil rights living legend tells his story. Mr. Bond, if you wouldn't mind doing me the honor of joining me at the podium. Before your talk, I'd please like to welcome President Frederick Lawrence to the stage to join me in presenting you with the Richman Fellowship Award.
Well, who's luckier than I am? I get to give an award to a man who honors us by accepting our recognition. And Dan has already thanked everyone who needed to be thanked, including the Richman family, to whom we are deeply grateful for having established this fellowship. And Chad has already laid out in great and inspiring detail the extraordinary journey of Julian Bond. So what does it fall to me to say about this hero? There's a word we use too easily, I think, in our society. So I will share with you a definition of hero that I learned from the man who actually was the captain or the commander of the escape ship Exodus, not Paul Newman, the real guy who actually the story is based on, John Growell, who was asked, do you think of yourself as a hero? And he paused and he said, well, if what you mean by a hero is someone who experiences an extraordinarily difficult situation and reacts to it in the only way he can to do what's right, regardless of what personal risk he's put himself in, okay, then I guess I'm a hero. Well, I think that's a pretty good definition. And I think by that definition, Julian Bond is my hero. Julian Bond is our hero. It is a great honor to present this certificate to Julian Bond, civil rights leader, politician, scholar, and writer, as the 2014-15 Fred and Rita Richman Distinguished Fellow in Public Life in recognition of his exemplary contribution to public life that have had a significant impact on improving American society, strengthening democratic institutions, advancing social justice, and increasing opportunities for all citizens to realize and share in the benefits of this nation. Welcome to Brandeis. Welcome to the Brandeis family.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank the other platform guests who preceded me here. This is a great honor. I spoke here at Brandeis many, many, many years ago. How many more, I do not remember, but I know I did. Somebody told me I did. And I'm very, very pleased, and I cannot tell you what a great honor this is to see so many people gathered here and so many happy faces. So thank you a great deal for this honor, and it is a great, great honor. And let me not prolong the evening, but continue with how I got in the movement. Now, I always do that to make sure I'm right. The title of this talk is taken from the title of a favorite sermon of Dr. King's. Now, this is not plagiarism, this is borrowing. An old and time-honored tradition. The first time you use somebody else's words, you always say, as Dr. King always said. The second time becomes, as someone said. And the third time, as I always say. So here is how I got in the movement. As I always say, I'm going to talk about myself. I retired from teaching at the University of Virginia in May of 2012, and I continue to teach today at American University and have taught at other campuses too. I'm 75 years old. I spent most of my early years in the South, in rural Georgia, and urban Atlanta. I grew up on university campuses, at Fort Valley State College for Negroes outside Macon, Georgia, on the campus of Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. This is a photograph from left to right of W.B. Du Bois, Dr. E. Franklin Frazier, a noted sociologist, and my father, Dr. Horace Mann Bond, and myself on the lower left, and my sister, Jane Bond, taken in March of 1942 on the campus of Fort Valley State College for Negroes, where my father was the first president. The men are dedicating us to a life of scholarship, and my sister to become a mother of scholars. My father was an academic, and my mother, Julia Washington Bond, was a school teacher and then became a librarian. Here she is hooding him at some academic celebration. My mother's grandfather was a slave. My father's grandmother was a slave too, given away as a wedding present to a new bride. Jane Arthur Bond was my great-grandmother, the daughter of Martha, born in 1828. Jane's two sisters, Charity and Patience, were sold away and never heard from again. Jane's frequent companion was an Arthur daughter, Belinda. When Belinda married a young Methodist minister, Preston Bond, in 1848, Jane was given to her as a wedding present and made her home with the Bond family in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, the Anderson County seat. When Preston Bond's wife became pregnant, he took his wife's slave as his mistress, and that union produced two children, James, born in 1863, and Henry, born in 1865, and both boys took the surname of their slave master father, Bond. The 13th Amendment freed Jane, James, and Henry Bond in 1865. Here are Jane and Belinda, slave and mistress, together. The two women, slave Jane Arthur and her mistress Belinda Bond, were quilters. Curiously, or perhaps not so, many of the women in my family have been quilters today. Jane was an accomplished quilter. The next two images are pictures of she made. James Bond was my grandfather. He became a civil rights activist. I grew up on black college campuses in Georgia and Pennsylvania. This is a family picture. Mother, brother, myself, sister, and father taken on Spelman College's campus. Many black middle-class families like ours had a copy of this book. It was called, oddly enough, the Green Book, because of its color, not because of its color, but because of the name of the publisher. It was a guide for black travelers to places, hotels, restaurants, gas stations, barber and beauty shops, where they knew they could be welcome. My family had one because we knew that there were many places we would not be welcome because of the color of our skin. Here is one such place. I attended Morehouse College in Atlanta. I was an active participant in Atlanta's sit-in movement. I'm fortunate enough to have been born in 1940, too soon to be a baby boomer, but old enough to have been eyewitness and participant to much of this history. I was in Atlanta in February 1960 when the sit-ins began there, and I helped to organize them. I was arrested at Atlanta City Hall the first time. In early February 1960, I was sitting in a cafe across the street from the Morehouse College campus, a place we went during classes or instead of classes, when an older student approached me, a man I only knew as a Morehouse football player. He held up a copy of that day's Atlanta Black newspaper, the Atlanta Daily World, and asked me, "Have you seen this?" I thought he was asking if I read a daily newspaper, And I knew every college student read a newspaper and said yes, but he meant had I seen the story of the paper, a story dateline Greensboro, North Carolina, whose headline read, "Students Sit In for Third Day." It told how for the third day in a row, college students from North Carolina A&T University in Greensboro sat at Woolworth's lunch counter. It described their demeanor, how they behaved, how they were dressed. It was like a handbook on how to sit in. Yes, I said, I've seen the story. What do you think about it, he demanded. And I answered, I think it's great. He said, don't you think we ought to make it happen here where we are in Atlanta? And before I could say, what do you mean we? He said, you take this side of the cafe and I'll take the other side and we'll call a meeting. Within a few minutes, we had gathered a cadre of students interested in meeting to discuss duplicating the Greensboro sit-in. And over the next several days, we widened our circle, ensuring we had students from all the Atlanta University schools. Not just Morehouse, a school for men, but also Spelman College for women, Clark and Morris Brown colleges, both coeducational, the Interdenominational Theological Center, a collection of theological schools, and Atlanta University, a graduate school. There are no secrets on college campuses, as you know, and word of our plans quickly reached Dr. Rufus Clement, president of Atlanta University, considered by many the de facto president of the entire university center. He called us to his office, told us he knew what we were planning, said he knew he couldn't stop it, and he wanted us to find a way to tell people why we were doing what we planned to do. A Spelman student, Rosin Walker, and I quickly wrote a document called An Appeal for Human Rights, based loosely on a pamphlet called A Second Look at Atlanta, a critical look written earlier by black academics on the contrast between Atlanta's reputation as a racially moderate community and the actual facts of the existence of widespread racial discrimination throughout the city. Dr. Clement, unknown to us, solicited a sum of money from Lillian Smith. Lillian Smith, a white Georgia author and racial liberal whose dramatic novel about interracial romance, Strange Fruit, had created a scandal across the South. Dr. Clement used that money to place what we had written as a full-page ad in the morning daily paper, the Atlanta Constitution, the afternoon daily, the Atlanta Journal, and the black daily, the Atlanta Daily World. The ad, signed by student body presidents of all the schools, created a sensation. It contrasted black and white disparities in Atlanta in housing, health care, education, and law enforcement, and closed with a warning. We must say in all candor that we plan to use every legal and nonviolent means at our disposal to secure full citizenship rights as members of this great democracy of ours. Georgia Governor Ernest Vandiver said, this was not written by our students. It sounds as though it was written in Moscow or Peking, two places I've never been. My first arrest was in Atlanta when I was 20 years old. It was March of 1960, during the Jim Crow era. I had led a group of my fellow students to the segregated cafeteria in the basement of Atlanta City Hall. We passed along the steam tables, loading our trays, and as first in line, I approached the cashier. Like most Southerners, she was polite as she told me, I'm awfully sorry, but this is for City Hall employees only. But I said, you have a big sign downstairs that says City Hall Cafeteria. The public is welcome. We don't mean it, she said. And she called the police who came and locked us up. Because nearly 200 of us had been arrested that day in various locations around Atlanta, it was decided to try one person for each group, and I was chosen to represent mine. For the first time in my life, I stood before a judge. On either side of me were two men I had never seen before or met before. I quickly discovered these were my lawyers. After some back and forth, the judge asked me, how do you plead? And I was panic-stricken. On the one hand, I knew I was guilty. Policemen had asked me to move, and I had refused. But I didn't feel guilty. I knew I had a right to eat in that tax-supported cafeteria, and any law that said I couldn't was no law at all. I desperately looked to my left, where the elder of my two lawyers was standing. He was the dean of black lawyers in Georgia, and had risked life and limb for more than 70 years to represent black people in courthouses in small towns where he dared not spend the night. Now nearly in his dotage, he was nearly asleep on his feet. I turned frantically to the lawyer on my right, who said in a whisper, not guilty, you fool. And I had the presence of mind to drop those last words, or perhaps I'd not be standing before you now. The Atlanta Civil Rights Movement had many dramatic moments. One occurred when Dr. King himself was arrested at Atlanta's biggest department store and taken to Reedsville State Prison in chains. King's jailing prompted a telephone call to Ms. Coretta Scott King from presidential candidate John F. Kennedy. Kennedy's campaign, without seeking or obtaining permission from the candidate or from Robert Kennedy, the campaign manager, arranged to print and distribute 1 million copies of a leaflet called "No Comment Nixon" and the candidate with a heart, John F. Kennedy. Printed on blue paper, it went down in campaign history as the Blue Bomb and is considered to have tipped the balance from Nixon to Kennedy. In 1960s, 56, Democratic Adlai Stevenson had won 60% of black votes. In 1960, Kennedy won 80%. The Blue Bomb made all of the difference. These are members of the Atlanta student movement meeting with Dr. King in his offices at the Southern Christian Leisure Conference, the civil rights organization he founded in 1957 after he moved back to Atlanta from Montgomery following the success of the Montgomery bus boycott. This is the button and the symbol of the civil rights organization I helped to found in the aftermath of the student sit-ins. I was one of several hundred students across the South who gathered in Raleigh, North Carolina on Easter weekend 1960 to found the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC as it was called. And I became the organization's communication director, a position I held for the next 5 years. This is a Richard Avedon picture of SNCC workers in Atlanta. Over its brief life, SNCC became the most aggressive of all the civil rights organizations with the largest staff working in the South. I helped to organize Atlanta's sit-in movement, which successfully integrated the city's lunch counters, parks, and tennis courts and movie theaters over the next several years. On May 13th, 1961, I met with freedom riders as they passed through Atlanta, never dreaming they'd be viciously attacked and beaten, some of them almost fatally, in Anniston and Birmingham the next day. This is the route the freedom riders took. The freedom riders, like the larger civil rights movement they grew from, forced change through nonviolent action that could not have been achieved as quickly as by other means. Like the sit-ins before them, they appealed to America's sense of fair play by challenging segregated transportation at the risk of their lives. Here's a Freedom Rider bus outside Anniston, Alabama, after Ku Klux Klansmen slashed the tires and set it on fire. The Freedom Riders were successful in forcing the Interstate Commerce Commission to integrate seating and interstate transportation. The ICC order went into effect on November 1st, 1961. Here are just a few of the more than several hundred Freedom Riders arrested in the original ride and smaller spontaneous rides that fell up across the South. Whoop. I was in Albany, Georgia, when a movement built by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and then joined and led by Dr. King, fought and founded. I was in rural southwest Mississippi where this picture was taken in 1961 when the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee established its first beachhead in the most resistant state, and I met a man who was later murdered because he dared to try to register to vote. I was in Birmingham late on the afternoon of the bombing that morning of the 16th Street Baptist Church that killed 4 schoolgirls. The bravery of the Birmingham protest and the young children facing fire hoses and police dogs showed how determined black people were to win their freedom. From beginning to end, the Birmingham movement only lasted a few weeks, but those weeks were filled with drama and heroism brought to Americans nationwide on television program. Here is now Congressman John Lewis and I standing across the street from the bombed church. Don't say anything funny about my pants. I was at the March on Washington when Dr. King delivered his I Had a Dream speech. Each of the civil rights figures or organizations coordinating the march volunteered staff for the effort. The most venerable organization was the NAACP, founded in 1909, which provided the public relations director, Henry Lee Moon. My organization, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was the youngest, and they contributed me, among others, and part of my job was giving Coca-Colas to the movie stars. I can never forget giving Coca-Cola to Sammy Davis Jr. and having him saying, "Thanks, kid." This is Sammy Davis Jr., a popular entertainer, and on the left, an unnamed journalist, and in the middle, the NAACP's executive director, Roy Wilkins, on the right. The March on Washington brought 250,000 people to the nation's capital, the largest protest demonstration held at that date. This peaceful assembly of so many, many thousands, the dramatic rhetoric of Martin Luther King Jr., the buoyant spirit of the occasion, convinced many of those watching on television of the justice of the marchers' goals. Here's a picture of people at the march. I'm visible on the far left corner of the picture. See me there in the corner? And another picture from the March on Washington. I was in Selma when the movement began in 1963, and in Montgomery in 1965 when the Selma to Montgomery marches arrived. The Selma movement culminated in the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, thought by many to be the civil rights movement's most important legislative victory. It eliminated the arbitrary and discriminatory barriers to registration that had rendered Southern blacks politically impotent, and arguably cleared the way for President Obama's election. Sadly, the Supreme Court eviscerated important sections of the Voting Rights Act 2 years ago, and governors and legislators in many states are erecting barriers to easy access to the right to vote. Our dysfunctional Congress has yet to make action to reinstate what President Ronald Reagan called the crown jewel of our democracy. Here's a picture of my brother and that's James Bond, and I in the now long gone Davis Brothers cafeteria in Selma, watching as Dr. King, the Reverend Ralph Abernathy, and King's brother, A.D. King, integrate the restaurant. In 1965, as the civil rights movement began to shift from confrontational protest tactics back to electoral strategies, I was elected to the Georgia House of Representatives. This is a picture of the newly elected black legislators, the first to serve in Georgia since Reconstruction, chosen in a special election prompted by court-ordered reapportionment. Here's a picture of me looking disconsolate as the Georgia legislature voted to expel me 184 to 12. Yes, I do look disconsolate, don't I? I was expelled because of my opposition to the war in Vietnam and my seat declared vacant. I ran for the vacancy, won the election, and was expelled again. The anti-war statement I endorsed was issued by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and prompted by when a colleague, Sammy Young, was shot and killed on January 4th, 1966, after leaving a civil rights demonstration in Tuskegee, Alabama, becoming the first student killed in the modern civil rights movement. Sammy was a veteran who had lost one of his kidneys in Navy service, and as a consequence, had to go to the bathroom more often than most. When he tried to use the segregated bathroom at a white-owned gas station in Tuskegee, Alabama, the station owner shot him in the back and killed him. The irony of a man being killed because he had lost a kidney in service to his country was too great. Anti-war sentiment in SNCC boiled to the surface, and we issued a statement denouncing the war, a move thought radical at the time. One of my constituents, Dr. King, led a march on the Georgia State Capitol protesting my exclusion. Dr. King voted for me too. At least that's what he told me when this picture was taken. I ran a third time, and in the interval, the United States Supreme Court decided that the Georgia House was wrong to deny me my seat, and I served in the House and Senate for the next 20 years. My case was called Bond v. Floyd, and I was defended before the Supreme Court by my brother-in-law, Howard Moore, who later successfully represented the activist Angela Davis, and by attorney Leonard Boudin. This is a photo of Attorney Moore and me watching the legislature's tote board as it became clear my colleagues were bound to expel me. As the Supreme Court, I sat behind the bar where the lawyers sat to watch the arguments with Attorney Boudin's law partner, Victor Rabinowitz, and I still remember when Justice Byron White interrupted the Attorney General of Georgia, Arthur Bolton. Georgia Attorney General Bolton was trying to argue that Georgia had the right to expel me. "Is that all you have?" Justice White asked. "You come all the way up here and that's all you have?" I turned to Attorney Rabinowitz and said, "We're winning now, aren't we?" And he said, "Yes, we are." And we were, and we did, 9-0. There's a great step forward for freedom of speech and for the right of elected officials to express their their thoughts. Here's some of my campaign literature. My life wasn't just all movement activity. I engaged in athletics too, even in boxing. I was a referee in a fight between Muhammad Ali and Atlanta Mayor Maynard Jackson, and I counted Ali out when Jackson knocked him out. This was the last of three-round exhibition matches Ali fought that night. I was the referee in the third match, and I remember during the third round, Ali said to the mayor in a stage whisper, "Hit me, hit me." And I could tell the mayor didn't want to hit him. Ali then threw a punch that stopped fractions of an inch from the mayor's jaw, and his eyes grew large, and I could see his mind saying, "Maybe I better hit him." And he did, and Ali fell down. I gave him the notorious long count, making infamous in 1926 fight between heavyweight champion Gene Tunney and former champion Jack Dempsey. I held the victorious mayor high. At Morehouse College, I was a student of Dr. King's and one of 8 people in the entire universe who could make that claim. He only taught one time. There's only 8 of us in the class. As proof, I offer the class roll. I recall sitting in the classroom at my alma mater. This class was a small seminar, and where I'm standing now, 2 teachers sat, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and the Reverend Dr. Samuel Williams. Williams was a local pastor and president of the Atlanta NAACP, and he had taught King philosophy when King was a Morehouse student. The 2 of them co-taught a survey seminar on the great philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, and all the rest. Most of the weekly classes were devoted to discussions of the civil rights movement, but I didn't have the wit to tape record them and cannot recall much about them. I do remember one day, after class, when King and I were walking across the beautiful Morehouse College campus, a wonderful moment occurred. I turned to him, and as we were walking, I asked, "Doc, how you doing?" His friends called him Doc. He said, "Julian, I'm not doing well. Segregation's everywhere. Black unemployment is high. Racial conditions seem to be getting worse. I have a nightmare." "No, Doc," I said, "don't say that. Try I have a dream." And of course, the rest is history. In 1968, 4 months after King's assassination, I was in Chicago at the Democratic National Convention. I was the co-chair of a challenge delegation from Georgia, drawn together to contest the way the state picked convention delegates. 4 years earlier, in 1964, after a bitter fight over the seating of challenge delegation from the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, an integrated political party built by the civil rights movement in Mississippi, the Democratic Party promised that future delegations would be racially integrated and fairly chosen. 4 years later, in 1968, there was no presidential primary in Georgia. All delegates were handpicked by the party chairman, and in 1968, he picked a delegation that was almost all white. Its membership included people pledged to vote for Alabama Governor George Wallace, a third-party candidate, not for any of the Democratic candidates. Despite support in Georgia for Robert Kennedy and Eugene McCarthy, none of the handpicked Georgia delegates was pledged to vote for either one of them. The delegation I headed was chosen democratically in an open convention in Macon. Our delegation fairly represented the more prominent Democratic candidates, Hubert Humphrey and Eugene McCarthy. By August of 1968, Robert Kennedy had been killed. I went to Chicago a week before the convention with Taylor Branch, who would go on to receive the Pulitzer Prize in 1989 for his wonderful 3-volume history of the civil rights movement, collectively called America in the King Years. Our job was to secure housing and transportation for our 60-member delegation, hotel rooms for them to stay in, and buses to transport them to the convention center. There was not a room to be had or a bus to be secured. Furthermore, unlike other delegations supported by their state political parties, we were challenging the legitimacy of our state's party and their leadership. We were nearly penniless. We were sadly walking Chicago's streets when a well-dressed black man recognized me and approached and asked if he could help. We explained our problem. He took us to a hotel we'd already unsuccessfully approached, and after a quick conversation with the manager, secured 60 rooms. We were astounded, but we still had no money to bring our delegation from scattered locations around Georgia to Chicago. This man suggested I ask his employer, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, the head of the Nation of Islam, more commonly known as the Black Muslim. We were incredulous. The Muslims were forbidden to vote and to participate in politics. They believed in racial separation, not integration. Why would the head of an organization that regularly characterized all whites as blue-eyed devils want to contribute to bringing an integrated group to a meeting where voting and political participation was the main idea? Nonetheless, our new friend arranged for me to have dinner with Mr. Muhammad at his mansion in Chicago's Hyde Park, the same home where Louis Farrakhan lives today. I left Blue-Eyed Taylor at home. After the meal, I explained our problem, and Mr. Muhammad asked me to return the next day. After that evening's meal, he surveyed the room full of dinner guests, all Muslims, about whether he should honor my request. In this patriarchal household, women sat at tables separated from the men, and he began by asking the women first. No, they said, we don't know this young man. He's not one of us. He'll give our money to the devils. My heart sank. He then surveyed the moon, and their reaction was mixed. Some yes, some no. He turned to them and said, Mr. Bond, in the Nation of Islam, we listen to the women, but we do what the men say do. He gave me $3,000 in $100 bills. I wired the money to Georgia. Our delegation arrived, and after days of lobbying and arguing, the convention voted to split Georgia's seats, half for us, half for the regular party. Most of the regulars walked out in anger, and the Georgia loyal national delegation got to occupy most of Georgia's seats and occupy most of Georgia's votes. I've often wondered why Mr. Muhammad did it. Why did a man who had built a movement on racial separatism and a withdrawal from the country's political institutions give money to bring a group of black and white Georgians to a political convention? Perhaps he remembered his early days in Georgia with some fondness, or was even then looking forward to the day when the Nation of Islam would shed its opposition to politics and would enter the political mainstream. It was at that Democratic convention in Chicago in 1968 that I was nominated to be the Vice President of the United States. Here I am on the Democratic Party floor. Obviously, I didn't win. At 28 years old, I was too young to hold the office. Instead, Maine Senator Edmund Muskie became the Democrats' 1968 vice presidential nominee. The convention ended in a police riot. Through all these years, the FBI has always been interested in me and whatever I did to report on my activity. Here I am as a bus full of workers bound for Mississippi in Freedom Summer 1964 leaves Oxford, Ohio. One of them, Mickey Schwerner, 24, James Chaney, 21, and Andrew Goodman, 20, once back in Mississippi, were chased down by members of the Ku Klux Klan, murdered and buried in an earthen dam. You can see their bodies here. That was the tragedy of 1964. The triumph was the passage that same year of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, whose 50th anniversary we celebrated last year. Here I am with colleagues at SNCC in the corner again. Here I am when I hosted Saturday Night Live. You younger people probably not remember, but it used to be a comedy show. With me left to right are Garrett Morris, Dan Aykroyd, and Lorne Michaels. And with Atlanta Mayor Maynard Jackson, Director Melvin Van Peebles, myself, and Richard Pryor on the set of the movie Grease Lightning. And here I am on the set of a new movie, which will come out in April. Please go see it. It's a romantic comedy, 5 to 7, opening in April. It features Glenn Close and Frank Langella. And here I am on a television ad speaking for marriage equality. I've been a frequent advocate for LGBT rights. When I'm asked, are gay rights civil rights, my answer is always, of course they are. Civil rights are positive legal prerogatives, the right to equal treatment before the law. These are rights shared by everyone. There's no one in the United States who does not or should not share in enjoying these rights. Gay and lesbian rights are not special rights in any way. It isn't special to be free from discrimination. It's an ordinary universal entitlement of citizenship. The right not to be discriminated against is a commonplace claim we all expect to enjoy under our laws and our founding document, the Constitution. That many had to struggle to gain these rights makes them precious. It doesn't make them special, and it does not reserve them only for me or restrict them from others. When others gain these rights, my rights are not diminished in any way. My rights are not diluted when my neighbor enjoys protection from discrimination. He or she becomes my ally in defending the rights we all share. For some, comparison between the African American civil rights movement and the movement for gay and lesbian rights seems to diminish the long Black historical struggle with all its suffering, sacrifices, and endless toil. However, people of color ought not be flattered that our movement has provided so much inspiration for others, that has been so widely imitated, and that our tactics, methods, heroes, and heroines, even our songs, have been appropriated or served as models for others. No parallel between movements is exact. African Americans are the only Americans who were enslaved for more than 2 centuries, and people of color carry the badge of who we are in our faces, but we are far from the only people suffering discrimination. Sadly, so do many others. They deserve the law's protections and civil rights too. Many gays and lesbians worked side by side with me in the 60s civil rights movement. Am I to tell them now thanks for risking life and limb to help me win my rights, but they're excluded because of a condition of their birth, that they cannot share in the victories they helped to win, that having accepted and embraced them as partners in a common struggle, I can now turn my back on them and deny them the rights they helped me win, that I enjoy because of them? Not a chance. And here I am in an ad against HIV/AIDS. And here's a new book written by my UVA colleague, Dr. Phyllis Loeffler. I conducted 50 interviews with black men and women to exercise leadership qualities, and Dr. Loeffler wrote this book about our findings. It's a great book. One of the persons I interviewed was Armstrong Williams, the conservative activist. You'll be interested in what he had to say about Brandeis' very own Anita Hill. We were talking about his defense and the fitness of Clarence Thomas to be a Supreme Court justice. He said to me, I don't regret supporting and defending Justice Thomas. I regret having her at Anita Hill's expense. I responded, you said a moment ago that you had been forgiven. Have you been forgiven by her? No, he said, I haven't talked to her. Do you require forgiveness by her? Armstrong said, no, I should. I guess I should, but someday I'll run into her. But you know, sometimes these wounds are so deep. I know sometimes time can heal them. And you know what? Best thing about life is the best things that happen to us are things we cannot plan. And hopefully, before I die and leave this place, I can make amends with her. That's my hope. I said, she's not hard to find. And here I am being arrested on the White House steps, not the White House steps, the White House fence, protesting the Keystone Pipeline in February of 2013. Arrested with me were actress Daryl Hannah, Michael Brune, executive director of the Sierra Club, Robert Kennedy Jr., and Connor Kennedy, and Bill McKinnon, founder of 350.org. And last but certainly not least, here I am with my good friend, race, however old or recent, is still with us today. It can be found everywhere around us, in our daily lives and in the daily newspapers. Almost every social indicator, from birth to death, reflects black-white disparities. Infant mortality rates are 134% higher for blacks. Chances of imprisonment are 570% higher. Rates of death from homicide 493% higher. Lack of health insurance 33% more likely. The proportion with a college degree 53% lower. And the average white American will live 4 years longer than the average black American. We know that race, more than any other factor, determines who is shot in the street by police, who's arrested, who's charged with what crime, who receives what length of punishment, and who receives the maximum sentence. And we know our policemen, most of whom we revere and respect, are not immune from criticism. No less an expert than James Comey, director of FBI, recently gave a speech in response to Ferguson and related events and spoke of mistakes by law enforcement, their latest latent biases, and the cynicism, and vowed not to let law enforcement off the hook. In 2013, every 28 hours, a police officer, a security guard, a police officer moonlighting as a security guard, or vigilantes killed a black person. This is not an official statistic. There are no official statistics regarding black deaths. Police departments do not have to keep these records. As Director Comey said, how can we address concerns about use of force? How can we address concerns about officer-involved shootings if we don't have a reliable grasp on the demographics and circumstances of these incidents? A 2013 report by the Malcolm X grassroots movement detailed 313 black deaths that year based on news clips and police reports. 136 people, 44%, were unarmed when they died. So that history is very much with us, afflicting our politics and affecting our lives in so many ways. None of us is immune from it. We're in a different country today than it was when I was first beckoned into the civil rights movement. That's only because of thousands upon thousands of Americans who put their bodies on the line for freedom and justice. The civil rights movement I'm so proud to have served in was made up mostly of ordinary people, many as young as some of you, some of whom were called upon extraordinary things. Dr. King didn't march from Selma to Montgomery alone. There were thousands marching with him, and thousands more who did the dirty work that made the movement a success. He didn't speak to an empty field on the march on Washington. There were thousands marching at his side, and thousands more who were marching long before he was born. Remember them as you remember him. He dedicated his life to justice and speech and peace. We could all do the same. Thank you.
Well, we'd like to devote the rest of our time to questions from all of you. There's a microphone over here. If you have a question, please feel free to line up. But while you're doing that, I'm going to take the privilege of sneaking in a question myself.
Okay.
The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, one of the most remarkable organizations of the civil rights movement. Could you speak briefly on what you see as the legacy and perhaps the most important contributions of SNCC?
Well, how many of you have seen the movie Selma? And you saw, if you paid real attention, about a 2-second piece of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. You saw an actor playing the role of James Foreman and played by an actor who was older than Dr. King, when in fact James Foreman was older than James Foreman, and not well presented in the movie. Anyway, you know, people in the civil rights movement don't like any movie ever made about the civil rights movement. There's not a person I know who's in the movement who's liked any movie made by anybody about the civil rights movement. That's why no matter what you think about President Johnson, and you probably don't like him much as a personality or as a politician, but if you depended on this movie alone, you would have an awful view of President Johnson. And actually, President Johnson was the hero of this movie and ought to have been praised and just thought of as a wonderful, wonderful person. So anyway, I don't know what this question was.
SNCC, back to SNCC.
Back to SNCC.
Right.
The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was a wonderful organization. It lasted only about a decade. It fought like nobody's business for justice and fair play. It accomplished so much all across the South and in parts of the North too. It's a wonderful, wonderful organization, and I'm sorry that it's not treated better in history or in movies.
Hello, last time I saw you was Democratic National Convention in 1972 in Miami Beach, Florida.
You're young guy.
I'm a little younger than you, not much, but you had a charisma that I thought was going to bolt you into national prominence, and I know you had your moment running for vice president. But my question is on a personal level. Do you have any regrets for having left the political world and entered the world of academia?
Not really. I've always thought it's best not to look back in life, and I've tried never to look back. And there are occasions when I have looked back and I've regretted this, regretted that, regretted something else, but I just don't believe in that. You have to look this way and keep going this way, and that's what I've always tried to do. I've had a wonderful life so far. I'm going to have even more. I'm married to a wonderful woman, wonderful, beautiful woman, and we have a wonderful life together, and just so glad to be with her. And anyway, my life is okay, and I don't look back.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Michael Abrams. I'm a senior here, and I'm a member of Brandeis Climate Justice. It's an organization on campus that's currently running the fossil fuel divestment campaign. And my question for you is, as a longtime activist, what is your opinion of both divestment and reinvestment as really one of many tactics that can be used by universities, churches, individuals, really any entity to advance their cause in conjunction with things like the action you participated in at the White House?
I believe that you ought to engage in almost any tactic you can. It's peaceful and nonviolent. Peaceful and nonviolent, engage in any tactic you can to win your goals. Set out what your goals are going to be. Tell people what you're going to do in order to win these goals. You're going to do X, Y, Z, and try as hard as you can to achieve, and just go ahead, go for it, and tell me a year from now what you did.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm here with my class. I'm Maggie. I'm here with my class of Creativity, the Arts, and Social Transformation, where we learn and investigate and explore the importance of art and using creative means and a creative mindset to make positive social change. And I was wondering, in your involvement, both as a student, as a politician, as a teacher, as all of these different roles you've had in your life and the huge roles that you had in this movement, how did creativity and always having an open mind and artwork and accepting other people, how did that play into your experience?
I always tried to keep an open mind about things I could do or should do, like these silly movies I've been in. Any of you see that movie with Richard Pryor? What was the name of it? Grease Lightning. Wonderful, wonderful movie, beautiful movie. And probably wasn't the best thing I should have done, but I loved it, I enjoyed it, and I'd do it again. And this other movie my wife and I are in, it's called 5 to 7. How many of you know what 5 to 7 means? In French. And what is it?
I think it's time to see your mistress.
Yes, it's time to see your mistress. And this movie is a funny movie, a romantic movie, and my wife and I are not having an affair in this movie. But anyway, what was the question? Anyway, I think
The arts, creativity.
you have to do whatever you want to do in life and become whomever you want to come in life and exercise whatever thing you want to in life. Do whatever you're summoned to do, no matter what it is. And if it makes you feel good, good for you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. What? I can't hear you. Oh, you're talking about the Gordon Parks. I don't know, how many of you seen these black and white, these color Gordon Parks pictures? You know, Gordon Parks is a wonderful black photographer who almost always took black and white pictures. And some pictures he made in Life magazine in color have just been released and are now being shown in exhibits in Atlanta, in New Orleans, and in other parts of the country. Beautiful, beautiful color pictures. There's one set of pictures which shows these black girls, young girls, pushing up against a park fence and looking at the white girls inside the park, and they know they can't get in there. And you feel like crying because of them. And they're awesome things. And they're beautiful, beautiful pictures. You should see it and see them again and again and again and again. They're wonderful, wonderful pictures, and lift yourself up by going to see them.
And they're actually currently on exhibit at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston.
Yes, hi, I'm Ben Kreider, and I'm a PhD student here at the Heller School. My question for you is, during the civil rights movement, obviously, you know, African Americans were front and center, but there were white allies. You talked about a bit Freedom Summer and whatnot. And I'm wondering, with the Black Lives Matter movement, like, obviously I'm a white man, I will never know what it's like a friend of my African American friend has to go through in dealing with police. What role can allies play in that movement, like tactically?
Allies can and do and did play a marvelous, marvelous role in the movement for civil rights. White allies, allies of all shapes and kinds and colors, just contributed so much to the movement for civil rights. We could not have made it without them. It's just wonderful to think of the people who assisted us, whose names we'll never know, and who just disappeared for one reason or another, went away or went off to someplace else. We're so happy to have had these people helping us. I can't tell you what a great contribution they made. We're so happy to have had them and want to have more.
Hi, my name is Sarah Gray. I'm also a PhD student at the Heller School. And stemming off of his question, I'm interested to know how current activists can marry academia and activism, and also what advice would you have for those activists who are involved in the Black Lives Matter movement?
Well, answer the second question first. You've got to have some set of ideas, a set of aims. I think that the end game of this is X, and X means this, and you want to achieve this. You want to have something to show at the end of this. And I'm not sure that many modern day movements always have that, or don't have it to the extent I think they should. And the first question?
The first question was how to join activism and academia.
Well, I think it's easy to do, and people in academia do it all the time. You've done it, I bet, and the young man who came up before you has done it, I'm sure. So keep on doing it. It's not difficult, and you do it all the time, don't you?
Yes.
You study, and you work, and you get involved in movement activity. You do all those things. You're doing them right now, aren't you?
Yes.
You don't have to ask people. You know you're doing it. So keep it up.
Thank you.
So if I could build on her question, many activists in the current Black Lives Matter movement model themselves after the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in terms of building an indigenous leadership, focusing on grassroots organizing, kind of eschewing a top-down approach to organizing. Do you think that is still a relevant and viable model for
Absolutely,
organizing?
absolutely. But you've got to do more than that. You've got to have a goal. You've got to say, this is the outcome I'm looking for. I'm going to do X. I'm going to work awfully hard. I'm going to lift up everybody I can. And X is going to be the end game here. And I think often we don't have an X. We don't have an end game. We don't have a plan. We don't have a goal. And to the degree that we do have a goal and a plan and so on, the better off we'll be. It just makes common sense that there's got to be some end game to our activism. And unless there's not, there'll be nothing there.
Hello, I am Ryan Millis. I'm a theater student here, and I'm a senior. That answer actually dovetails into a two-part question I have. And so equality is obviously what we're all striving for. Do you think that it is ever fully attainable and fully realized? You've had a great experience and been able to do a lot towards it, but do you think it's ever possible to fully achieve that for everyone, gender, race, equality? And then also, what are the next steps that you would suggest so that we can get closer to that paradigm?
Well, to answer your first question first, I think it is possible to achieve an end game. Now, quite often you don't achieve an end game. Quite often you don't get to the end game. You don't get to win the prize. But I think there are occasions when you can, and you do. And you get to where you're going quicker than you think you're going to. Look at the movement of gay and lesbian people today. Who among us would have thought that all of these goals would have been, who among us thought this would happen? I certainly didn't. I had no idea. Just no idea that this would happen. That so swiftly, so quickly, that this movement would win so many goals. And the fact that they have ought to be an inspiration to all of us, and ought to say, we can do more. We can do more. We can win this. We can do that. We can do this. We can get these stupid laws they're passing around the country. We can wipe them out. We can make the governor of Indiana. We can give him some. We can give him some sense.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Casey, and I'm an undergraduate student here. And the question I'd like to ask is, what sort of future did you think America would have in terms of race relations and more generally as a student and as an activist in the 1950s and the 1960s?
You know, I find it difficult to answer that question because, on the one hand, I thought X would be the outcome, and at the end of some period, when I was 25 or so, X would be the outcome. And X has not been the outcome, for me at any rate. We've won some gains, we've had some goals, some wonderful things have happened, but things I expected to happen haven't happened yet, and may not happen ever, although I hope I'm wrong about that. So I had a mixed view of what the outcome would be. But I've seen goals won, I've seen things happen, and I never expected them to happen. I never expected these goals to win. So I've seen good things turn out, and I know others will too. I'm an optimist. I believe the best thing is going to happen. And it hasn't always, at least in my life, but some things have, and I'm happy to have been around to see it.
Okay, thank you for answering.
Thank you.
the question.
Hello, I'm Sophie. I'm an undergraduate freshman here.
You're an undergraduate at last.
Yeah. And my question is, could you speak a little bit more to the philosophy of nonviolence, kind of its power and why, when it works so well, and kind of like what attracts you to it, I suppose. Thank you.
You know, it's interesting but this afternoon or earlier today, we had a discussion with many foreign students about nonviolence and the success or the failure of nonviolence here, there, and other places. It's very interesting to hear other people from countries different from ours say we tried nonviolence and to the X degree it worked and achieved this goal. And it was interesting to hear because it's something I don't hear all the time, and I bet most of us don't hear all the time. So it was interesting. And somebody asked about the extensive treatment or the extensive training we had in nonviolence in the student movement when I was a kid. I was a young person. And I had to disabuse the person who asked this question. Because if you were in Nashville, for example, Nashville, Tennessee, you had extensive training in nonviolent resistance. You had somebody hitting you with rolled up newspaper. You had somebody pushing you and you had people blowing smoke in your faces. Everything they could do to get used to this bad treatment you were going to receive so that the end game, you'd be much better at it. And in Atlanta, where I grew up and where I was active in the movement, people said, if somebody hits you, don't hit back, okay? And that was it. So some of us had extensive training saying, do this, do this, do this, do this, do it this way, do it this way, do it this way. And other people said, just don't hit anybody, okay?
But obviously speaks to the remarkable discipline.
It is, tremendous discipline. Just to have somebody say, don't hit people, and for you to not hitting people. I don't know anybody in the movement who hit anybody. And think of the temptation to hit other people, as great as it was.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm Ted Johnson, one of the professors at the Heller School. We met outside earlier.
Right.
Thank you for coming. Congratulations on receiving the award. We're about the same age. I'm a little younger. And I want to thank you for your service to us, to the nation. You were an inspiration, and it's a real honor to have you here. I believe it was the '68 Democratic Convention. Robert Kennedy used words like, "The hope still lives, the dream shall never die." And you spoke of your mentioning to Dr. King instead of the nightmare about the dream. So I'm curious. I teach a course called The Future of Diversity. What is the dream? We keep talking about it. Parts of it, I think, maybe we're realizing. But if you were to sit back and think, we're not there yet, What does the dream still look like for you?
I think it looks like a better day than today, and we're not always able to examine exactly what it is, but we know it's out there. We know it's reachable. We know we're able to get to it, and we have to do everything we can to push, fight, struggle, kick, yell, scream to make it happen. To work in the hardest way, the strongest way to achieve this new day. I think all of us know that, or most of us know that, and do everything we can to move further and further. We just have to work a little harder. We have to work more than we've done. All of us have to do more than we've done. And that's not beyond our capability. We can do it. I know we can do it. I know all these people in this room can do it. And they get up tomorrow and do it. They get up this afternoon and do it. They can, won't you? See there?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Justin. I'm also an undergraduate, and I guess my question is more along the same lines. Is also that we tend to be fighting. It's one thing to pass laws and advocate in that way, but how do you fight the war for hearts? Like, how do you actually change the opinions of people who may not actually believe, in racial equality, and who advocate for that intolerance? There's a lot of people who we can, walk into Congress and say, let's change this law, but how do you actually make it happen? How do you go down south and say, here's this law, let's end the discrimination now, with allowing people to actually believe in it? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. You get a group of people together, and you say, let's go do this thing. Here's these members of Congress over there. Let's get 50 people here to go at them and make them think about thinking in a different way. Some of them will, some of them won't. Some of them will never have an intelligent thought in their minds. Some of them will say, oh, I've been wrong all the time. How can I change my behavior? How can I become a different person, a better person? And we can make people change their minds about things like this. I don't mean beat them on the head or something, although it's tempting on some occasions. But we can do it. I believe we can do it. All we have to do is get together and do it. If you had all these people in this room here got together, every single one of them to do X, Y, Z, you can't imagine what power they have. They can't imagine what power they have. If they got together and got to it, it would happen. I know that's true.
Thank you.
We used to sing this song at the time. It was 1960, the place the USA. February 1st became a history-making day. From Greensboro across the land, the news spread far and wide. As quietly and bravely, we took a giant stride. Heed the call, Americans all, side by equal side. Sisters, sit in dignity. Brothers, sit in pride. In pride, in pride.
We have time for 2 more questions, so please.
Hi, I'm Julia. I'm a senior. So my question is in regards to the police force and the attention that you mentioned that's being paid on the violence against Black people in our country. Do you think that that's an issue that can be resolved with perhaps like racial sensitivity training or more screening for police officers, or do you think the institution is fundamentally flawed and needs to be changed?
I think it attracts people who are fundamentally violent. And I think they need to be treated to a higher degree of training than they're receiving now. And they need to be paid more money than they're receiving now. They need to be taught what the job of a policeman is. And I believe if they're taught well and taught with proper training, they'll be better people. But you know, there've been studies done of policemen, and it attracts people who are dangerous people, and they need to be taught something about not being as dangerous as they are.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, got a question here?
Hi. So this is a kind of strange question. I guess I've been grappling a lot with like ideas of like the importance of nonviolence, but also the place that some violent resistance and struggle has played in being able to like help people gain rights. A lot of times I think about, for example, the Caribbean and the ways in which like violent slave rebellion and revolt sometimes led to that. And I wanted to know, as someone that was part of a large nonviolent force or a group of people who are trying to create change, do you think that there are any spaces for nonviolent and violent struggle to be in conversation with each other?
And this was obviously a discussion in SNCC,
Yes,
1965, 1966.
Yes,
right?
he's right. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee had enormous debates. Nonviolence, violence, nonviolence, violence. And it's hard to say what we decided because we're the kind of people who didn't always decide things, but argued again and argued again and again and again, and kept on arguing. But these are healthy discussions about what's next in your life, how you're going to behave in moving this direction, and the discussions that everybody ought to have, and the kinds of discussions everybody ought to embrace. What's next? What's the next thing? What's the next thing we're going to do? How are we going to behave over here? We need to have these arguments with ourselves and be serious about them. Don't just fool around. Be serious about them and hope that you come out to some proper ending, and maybe you will and maybe you won't, but I think you will.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please, another round of applause for Mr. Julian Bond.
We invite you to join us in refreshments, and there are also books for sale in the back if you'd like to purchase a book and then come up to the stand to have Mr. Bond sign it for you. Thank you all for coming.